Everyone knows the Star Wars prequels aren't exactly cinematic Shakespeare, and for all my gabble about hard magic systems and midichlorians and Brandon Sanderson, I'm fully and freely capable of acknowledging this fact. However, as I'm sure someone smarter and more famous than me has said at least a version of at some point, talking about problems is cheap and easy. Talking about solutions is how you actually make money. Of course, anyone who actually believes that has obviously been kept mercifully away from business and politics. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, it's all well and good to be on the bandwagon, but what can be done about it? Is there anything salvable among the wreckage, and can that be brought up to at least match the quality of the sister trilogy? In practical speak, not so long as Disney has the franchise locked in a vault at the heart of their iron fortress of doom, no. But hypothetically speaking, I believe there is a narrative diamond hidden somewhere amidst all the memes, poop and fart jokes and Jar Jar. Now, in the interest of not making this video's script a full-on new edition draft of the whole trilogy, I've confined myself to the original plots as originally presented. However, I will be making a series of small but crucial changes throughout in order for Anakin's character arc to go from prodigy slave boy to dark icon of the Sith in a way that doesn't feel like a last-second about-face, whose only impetus was that it was in the script. There are 4 cardinal relationships that need to be executed onto perfection within those films' 6-hour runtime, 2 of which weren't even present at all, and the other 2, well, we'll trudge up that little volcanic slope when we get to it. For just now, the 4 relationships the prequels absolutely had to get right, but either fumbled or failed to include in descending order of importance, are as follows: Anakin and ObiWan, Anakin and Padme, Anakin and the Jedi Council, and Anakin and Palpatine. Addressing them approximately in that order, let's talk about what all I'd change if I were an editor back during the good old days over at Lucasfilm. First off, the dynamic between Anakin and Obi-Wan. The reason for this duo being at the top of the priority list should be self-evident if you've seen all 6 movies. Obi-Wan is Anakin's connection to the Jedi Order. He was raised in the temple from infancy, trained in the Jedi arts by Yoda, and then apprenticed to the Maverick Master Qui-Gon. On paper, he's the perfect mentor for Anakin, and it is ultimately through his eyes that we, the audience, view Anakin's fall to Darth Vader. And so, in order for that to hit like the mountain of semi-trucks that it needs to, we need to feel like something pristine and beautiful has been not just lost, but deliberately shattered into pieces when the 2 of them duel on Mustafar. So, to that end, the first change I would make is having Obi-Wan be the one to go with Qui-Gon into Mos Espa in Episode 1 instead of Padme. This way, we can have them start off bickering and butting heads. Anakin viewing Obi-Wan as the stuffy, overcautious older sibling, and the elder seeing him in turn as this obnoxious, brash, volatile child who needs to be lectured and put in his place. But by the end, through fighting to liberate Naboo from the droid invasion, they each come to learn to appreciate the other's perspective, and each earn a healthy respect from the other for their abilities. Next up, we have to talk about Anakin and Padme, easily the worst element of the prequels on a technical basis. On some level, you could argue this is equally vital to the first, as it is ultimately Anakin's love for his secret wife and their unborn children that serves as Palpatine's hammer for driving a wedge between Anakin and Obi-Wan. But just put a pin in that for right now. We'll come back to it later. At this point, I would make 3 key changes. The first being that, since we're removing Jar Jar from the picture, we could have it be Padme who initiates the alliance with the Gungans at the end of Episode 1, having it be that, as Queen, she'd been slowly nursing diplomatic ties between the 2 governments for just such an occasion, thus cementing her as A, a competent ruler, B, a diligent peacemaker, and C, an actual character with agency and a believable candidate for mother of Princess Leia. And so then, when Palpatine, who is the Naboo ambassador at that point in time, says something cynical like, "The Senate is too bureaucratic to help, and the Gungans hate our guts," Padme would reveal how she'd secretly been mending those relations as queen for just such emergencies as this, thus giving the audience a bit more insight into both of their characters. And of course, Anakin would be there to hear all of this, and would be impressed with this woman's tenacity to go and free her people from oppression. I would have this shared love of liberty and justice, and the mutual frustration at the stymieing quagmire of the Republic Senate and the Jedi Order preventing them from meaningfully acting to better the galaxy, be the common ground over which Anakin and Padme bond while on Naboo, which I suspect was George Lucas's original intention. It just got overshadowed by tangents about sand in the original. And on that note, for change number 2, I would have it be Watto that killed Anakin's mother in Episode 2, not the Tusken Raiders. My thought being that, after losing everything he had on that pod race Anakin won, Watto just took out all of his impotent rage on Shmi, possibly either straight up working her to death or beating her to the brink, and then just leaving her to her fate out of sheer spite. Either way, upon learning this, Anakin would lash out in a fit of fury, slicing Watto in half right in front of Padme, who would have actually seen and heard everything. Padme, remember, hates slavery just as much as Anakin does, and though she wouldn't approve of his methods, she would sympathize enough that she would actively help him cover up the deed, rather than him just ranting at her about how he mindlessly slaughtered women and children after the fact. And this brings me nicely into my third major revision to this part of the story. Just as in the original, Padme would be under a petty revenge assassination threat from Newt Gunray. However, I would have Jango Fett be the one to launch the attack himself, and I would replace the speeder chase in Episode 2 with a 3-way battle between Fett, Anakin, and ObiWan. This way, we'd actually get to see Fett do what he's supposedly a peerless master of, fighting Jedi. This is extremely important, as it's the whole reason Count Dooku selected Jango to be the template for the clone army in the first place. And second, it would give Anakin and Obi-Wan a showing of how well they've progressed, both as individuals and as a duo since Naboo, as well as giving us a brief glimpse of a potential chink in Anakin's armor, since this fight will involve Padme, who I may or may not also have played a determining part in warding off Fett's assault, as he'd be overly concerned with the Jedi to regard her as an actual threat. And it's at this point that I'd reveal my fourth change. The reason why Padme always arms herself despite having doubles and bodyguards is that she's not wholly comfortable with the idea of other people dying for her, which would be another major point of affection between her and Anakin. But lest we forget that this is a tragic tale, we must now look to the faults that will inevitably drive our protagonist off the proverbial cliff. First among these, one whose only brief appearance in Revenge of the Sith only served to make Anakin look like an entitled brat throwing a tantrum, the relationship between Anakin and the Jedi Council. For most of you who've only seen the films, you might not appreciate why this one's such a big deal. Well, remember how I said Obi-Wan was Anakin's sole connection point to the Jedi Order? That was because the rest of the Order viewed Anakin as an outsider, not to be trusted, or, depending on your point of view, feared for being both an outsider and a Force anomaly. The only reason they agreed to let Obi-Wan train him at all was because he had the most natural talent of any Jedi since Yoda, and even surpassed the old Grandmaster himself in raw Force potential, and also because Obi-Wan threatened he would train Anakin with or without their permission. That much I would leave as is. However, rather than being a parting oath to his dying master, Obi-Wan's motivation would be a full-hearted belief that Anakin was the chosen one, a belief instilled by Anakin's superhuman showings on Naboo. This would highlight Obi-Wan's own critical fault, his shatterpoint, if you like, that would lead to him not sensing Anakin's shift in allegiance until after it was already too late. This is what ultimately defines a tragedy. The characters, whom we want to see succeed, have all the means to overcome the challenge set before them, but because of an innate flaw with their characters, they are ultimately doomed to failure, and it is that certainty which makes it tragic. Not because the audience, in effect, looked ahead in the script, or because they knew what sort of genre they were watching. And that, I believe, is where the Star Wars prequels truly failed, and where I mean to make them succeed. Now, I've got enough thoughts on this point to spin it off into its own separate video, which is what I'm going to do. For the time being, I'm going to sign this one off with this final thought. Anakin's fatal flaw is hubris. The reason he succumbs to the temptation of the dark side is because he meets up with the one problem he isn't able to simply power through, the inevitability of death. And he's unable to fully accept the Jedi's teaching of Zen due to the established friction between him and the Order. And what makes this outcome tragic is that, despite Obi-Wan being the one Jedi Anakin actually trusts and likes, as he is similarly conflicted due to his attachment to Anakin himself, he is also the one Jedi who isn't qualified to teach that particular lesson, at least not in a way that will actually stick, and so it makes Palpatine seem like the only viable alternative. Right then, this script turned into much more of a log than I'd expected or meant it to, so if you liked what you heard, or even if you didn't, I'd appreciate it if you'd consider doing all the regular YouTube stuff, like subscribe, share, etc. That way I can justify making more like it in the future. Otherwise, I'll just be talking to myself, which kind of defeats the point of having a YouTube channel. But anyway, that's enough out of me for one day. If this video does well, I might do a follow-up series breaking down the changes I would make to each individual movie and sequence, as there is still plenty more work to be done. But that's a whole extra baggage train for another time. Until then, stay safe, stay sane, and may the Force be with you. Peace.